pleasure of introducing Lucas Benitez and Greg Asped, who are the co-founders of the Coalition of Immokalee Workers in Florida. I read some of the book Tomatoland and some background materials that you sent. I am kind of blown away by the genesis of the movement and who you both are in your work. You know, my first question would be, I think some of the folks in this room are going to be shocked to know what conditions were like in Immokalee when you first started organizing. And Lucas, I've read your sort of early story of how you first got into this organizing. Can you tell us more kind of about what those conditions were, and then what did it take for you to build a shared vision in this community, among the various folks who make up the farm worker movement?
Yeah, but Immokalee is in Southwest Florida. A lot of people think it's in South America or Mexico, but it's in our backyards. Immokalee is a farm workers town. It's formed by 3 communities: Mexicans, Guatemalans, and Haitians. And it's really important for the agricultural industry, especially during the winter, and from this area, because we produce different vegetables and fruits, but the major production is tomatoes. So 90% of tomatoes as produced and consumed in the United States during the winter came from this area, from Southwest Florida. So when we started to the CAW, I started with a farm worker, and I saw and suffered the firsthand these abuses. And I saw the sexual harassment for women, so the daily bread for thousands of women working in the fields, physical abuse, verbal abuse, and sometimes you work 3 or 4 days. When you try to recover your money, you never receive your payment. So when we started the CAW in the first year when we started our work, we recovered more than $100,000 in bad wages. So this is the rule: physical abuse, verbal abuse, sexual harassment, and extremely cases, slavery, real slavery. And we work very close with the Federal Department of Justice, but the Civil Rights Division, to investigate and prosecute 7 cases. And we liberate more than 1,000 farm workers in a real slavery in the US. So we came from there. And we started to organize by ourselves, because we saw the situation. We need to see a change, to change the imbalance of power between farm workers and growers. Because in Florida, the major producers is the big agri-industries. It's not family farms, it's not farmers, it's a big agri-industries. They have a lot of power, but it's another power in the top of the, and we're talking about more about this later.
Right. Do you have anything you want to add on that, Greg?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of building the shared vision around that, I mean, I think Lucas explained the conditions extremely well, the kinds of challenges every single farm worker used to face in the fields where we are. That's enough to get people active, but it's not enough to build a movement. And I just want to start by saying everything that has been said thus far is so on target. If people are actually interested in the idea of how to organize, every single thing that has been said here about asking why, about tenacity, all these things are exactly what we had to do ourselves to do what we did. But you can't, I mean, horrible conditions don't start a movement. What we had to do, we actually used an approach called popular education, which is a form of organizing and building awareness in the community that's actually from the communities where everybody in Immokalee was from originally, their home countries, Latin America and the Caribbean. And it's a very slow process. It's one of reflection before action. It's one of bringing people together around discussions. It's participatory, it builds leadership. It's something where it's essentially an investment in time in order to have the materials you need to start building a movement. Broad base of leadership, a strong and shared vision of an analysis that allows everybody to work together. And so we spent a lot of time doing that. And another thing that was said earlier was just that there's a lot of times when you're trying things, you just try because you have to. That's part of the tenacity. You can't not do this when you're in the conditions. that we were in. And so you try everything you can until you find the right thing. But that's part of this process too, because in that process of reflection and action, the action feeds back into reflection. You continue sharpening your analysis, and we can talk more about where that analysis took us to finally actually let us break through and find the change we have.
And from there, we started our equation, C plus C equals C.
We weren't good at math, but we were good at that.
Unless E equals
Which is-
0, in which case you're totally good.
No, but C plus C equals C is, it came from the popular education and our meetings, and from there. So it's consciousness.
Consciousness.
Yes, it's really difficult for my accent. Plus commitment equals change. So we started from there. Created consciencia, consciousness,
Consciousness.
and our community, commitment for our members, for our own community, and started from there. And now, almost 24 years later, we started to see the real change in the fields.
So when I quoted Van Jones on there were more than 3 neurons involved in the production of this thought, I was thinking of you. And this idea of how you got to a consumer network as the way to help tomato pickers stop being exploited. Can you talk about how you made those leaps and the neurons involved?
Sure. So for many years, as we wandered in the wilderness, we focused on the immediate culprits and the sort of abuses that we saw, which were the farm bosses, the employers, the people who paid the low wages, the sub-poverty wages, the people who did the abuse. And we did what most worker organizations did. We did community-wide strikes of thousands of people stopping work and withholding labor. You find out pretty quickly that when people are extremely poor, you can only withhold labor for a few days, frankly. It's a physical law. And so after a while, that does not have the strength to really actually get what you want. But we were working through our tactics to find a way to win what we call dignity, dialogue, and a fair wage. Dignity is decent working conditions. Dialogue is a sustained place at the table, a voice for workers in the decisions that shape their lives. And a fair wage is self-explanatory. So after we had done that for some time, we went from just seeing the world to the farm gate and sort of lifted our heads up and looked outside and realized tomatoes don't end their existence once they leave the farm. They actually go somewhere, and where they go is to the place of greatest power, the retail brands. Eventually they make their way to the retail brands and to the consumer. And so our analysis, as we started down that route and actually began to see the world differently, led us to see that, in fact, these consolidated fast food brands and these consolidated purchasers, everywhere from Walmart to McDonald's and down, had an unprecedented purchasing power that allowed them to drive prices down at the farm gate. And growers, on their part, farmers on their part, were negotiating. All of their inputs were with other large companies like Monsanto and Exxon and banks, who they didn't have negotiating power. The one group they had negotiating power with was labor.
It's us.
Exactly. And so what they could do is squeeze labor to maintain their profit margin. But really the squeeze was coming down from the top. And so in 2001, we changed our tactics, we changed our approach, and we launched the Campaign for Fair Food with the motto, Taco Bell makes farm workers poor, which goes to the why. We thought why was because growers don't pay well. But we figured out after asking why a few more times, growers don't pay well because they don't have enough to pay well. Why? Because there's this consolidation at the top of the food market which squeezes. The market is a hierarchical system that allows that sort of pressure downward. And so that consolidation allowed or created the poverty that we were facing every day. So when we launched the campaign with that motto, no one had an idea what we were saying. We had to explain it. We had to help people understand it. And nobody knew who we were.
No, and sometimes these big buyers, they have the inspectors sent to the fields to check the production, but it's for healthy production. It's secured by the USDA Department complying to all these standards, but they never check the human rights for the workers working in the fields. So they don't require this point.
Right, and because the market is hierarchical, and it doesn't actually end at the brands, it ends at the consumers, it ends at us. And that's actually the most important thing that people don't think of when they think about the food market in a lot of ways. They think the biggest buyers are the Walmarts of the world, but we are. And generally, we're dormant. Generally, we don't really express to the retail brands what we want them to do in terms of how they manage their supply chains. But we decided to try to change that. And so in 2001, we launched the campaign, and we started to talk to people who were already mobilized, right, in other ways, students who were mobilized against sweatshops and that sort of thing, people of faith, and we started to build a coalition. And eventually we were able to create a base of enough power, and it didn't have to be, again, I keep reciting things that were said earlier, it didn't have to be 100% of the consumers for this to work. It had to be a very small number. But we had enough to actually move brands to agree to change fundamental things about how they manage their supply chain.
All right. We didn't actually ask the question about what happened in the end. What happened in this campaign, and then I'm interested in both sort of the wins of the campaign and then how you went from that into really thinking about structural change.
But after 4 years, the national boycott, we signed the first agreement with Taco Bell, and after that, we followed with McDonald's, Burger King, Subway. So the leaders of the fast food industry is working with us, and we're going the next step with the service providers, and we're very proud to work with Compass Group and Bon Appetit as the two representatives for these big brands. So now, included a few fresh markets, Whole Foods and Fresh Market, and Walmart is working with us to improve the conditions in the fields. So, and we started a new precedent and changed the real change happening in the fields. It changed our lives. The more important is the relationship right now. We started to eliminate the sexual harassment for women right now in the fields. It's a zero tolerance under the Fair Food Agreements, this abuse, child labor, and physical, verbal abuse. And not by law, but it's by our contract. So now the farmers need to provide shade in the fields for farm workers. Not by the state law, but that's thanks to the Fair Food Agreements. We have a chance to take breaks if it was really hot, because Florida, sometimes it's really hot. In the past, when it's really hot, sometimes 100 degrees, if you try to take a break, go to the bus, and next day you don't have a job. Now you have a right to take a break if it's necessary. So this real change has improved our lives. So in the economic relief, and the other point in this agreement says these corporations pay 1 penny more per pound of tomatoes when they buy tomatoes from Florida. So thanks to this penny, in the last 4 seasons, we share more than $20 million in bonus to farm workers. So the economic relief is really good, but the more important for us is our human rights. Now it's respected. So, and we created WSR, because for many years it's CSR, corporate social responsibility. But who has created this social corporate responsibility? It's people sitting in a nice office with air AC, and they never go to the fields, and they never go to the Bangladesh and see the people working in the sweatshops. So we decided to create our own WSR, Workers' Social Responsibility. So now we have this big group, and also we share our experience with other groups and expand the program.
So the one thing I would add to the things I heard earlier that is maybe assumed in what was said about the elements you need in order to make real, lasting social change is power. And you're welcome. power is the ability to make someone else or some other institution with power say yes when they really desperately want to say no. And in the case of what we're asking institutions to do, we haven't had a single one whose first answer right off the bat was, yeah, good idea. You know, we've had some, like our partners here in the room, who were much, much, much faster to coming and saying, yeah, we share your vision. Let's talk about how we can work together and maybe marry the visions we have about a more fair supply chain. But generally, whether it's with the buyers or with the growers, you have to have power to actually make the vision you have become real. Otherwise, it would have been real already. Otherwise, it would have happened because consciousness in this country bends toward justice, as to paraphrase. And so at some point, you know, the social ills in the fields that people all really have heard about, we would have eliminated them if everybody wanted to do the right thing. But you have to have power to do that. So in our case, the power we have harnessed is the power of the purchasing order. That's maybe the most important thing for this room to take away from this, which is for the food movement, the power of the PO is the thing that can change food safety issues, because no one's going to buy from a grower who does not meet certain food safety regulations. It's a thing that can then change what's being planted, and in our case, it can change sexual harassment, sexual violence, slavery, wage theft, and all the things we've been able to start to change in the fields. Because in our agreements with these 14 multi-billion-dollar retail food corporations today, they will only buy from growers who comply with the Fair Food Code of Conduct. And if growers refuse to comply or are found in violation and refuse to fix, they cannot sell to 14 of the biggest buyers in the world today. And so that focus on enforcement backed by market power, is what makes really this program, that plus the worker participation that Lucas talked about, those two elements, makes this program unique in the world of certifications, in the world of social responsibility, because that power is what allows us, when we're talking to a grower who's had the same farm boss, the same crew leader for 20 years, and that crew leader happens to be a sexual predator, and that we've found that through the complaint system and through the audit process. And that grower does not want to give up that farm boss. But the choice is keep that boss or lose sales to Walmart, McDonald's, and Burger King and everybody else. The boss is gone. And that's the way we've made change, is through this. But that power we had to win by organizing consumers, and that campaign to organize consumers, we had to reach through a process of asking why, building consciousness in our own community, and getting to the place where we were able to actually make these changes today.
Did I mention that we had brilliant change makers in the room today?
One last thing, and the Fair Food campaign is still running because we have the major buyers and the major retail companies, but one of the fast food industries is refused to work with us, and it's Wendy's, and that's why we have the national boycott against Wendy's now.
So don't eat that.
So we'll bring
know
Greg and
everybody in
Lucas
this room
back
loves to
for
eat at Wendy's.
questions in just a minute.